All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 127. We're talking to you about college football in a kind of abbreviated fashion because we're in the doldrums of the offseason. My name is Bobak Hayeri. I'm your host. Love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on college football. You can always hit request in the bottom left, and I'll let you up on stage and we can have a chat. It's always good to hear from you and hear what your thoughts are on the goings on in another fine week of the off season. Let's see, just going to go get off one quick tweet to let people know how they can hit request. So yeah, as we're heading into this off season, there's a couple of interesting stories that have been popping up this week. I'll be happy to kind of go over some of the highlights on our CFB, but at any time you'd like to join in, just hit request and we'll hear from you. Some of the things that struck me, well, obviously we just had President's Day, and one of the annual traditions we like to do on RCFB, but mostly as well on Reddit CFB on Twitter, is honor those presidents who played college football to some regard. Some of them didn't necessarily get varsity letters, but many of them did. Well, not many, but a good chunk of them did play. Specifically, the college football playing presidents that we always like to honor. Dwight Eisenhower, who was at Army, an injury kind of cut short his career there, but we kind of went in a little bit of out of order here. Ronald Reagan played at a small college in Iowa, which he was originally from before moving to California, becoming an actor, then governor, and then, of course, president at Eureka College. So Ronald Reagan was actually a college football player himself at Eureka College. Richard Nixon, who actually, and, he's obviously got a complicated history as a president, but in his younger days, he was a smart kid. He stayed in the kind of remote, what was then more of a remote part of Southern California. He was from, his family had a farm in kind of east of Orange County. And when his dad was getting sick, actually they had a store as well. He stayed to help him with the store rather than go to Duke. So he went to Whittier, which is a small college that unfortunately just dropped football. They had one of the best names. They were the Whittier Poets. But he played for them. He was a bench warmer for the most part, but everyone is always shocked when they see his college football photo. He's one of the more handsome ones in his younger days. And then Gerald Ford is probably the best college football player who ever served as president. He was a stud at Michigan and looks tough as hell if you ever look up some of his college football playing days. JFK he only was on the JV squad, but I looked up the old Harvard yearbook. And he was on a JV squad back when those were more common. There are still JV squads out there at JUCO level, some of the lower divisions. NAIA has them. And then one last college football playing president, which we'd forgotten about before. Jimmy Carter, who we know is in hospice care right now, he played sprint football at Navy, at the Naval Academy. Sprint football is just like regular football. It's just designed for smaller build people. You have to below a certain weight. And the academies are dynamite at it. Army and Navy are probably the two strongest sprint football teams because everyone at the academies is basically built solid for playing football at that kind of that lower weight level and lower weight limit with that sheer athleticism so many of those folks at the academies possess. So those are the 6 college football playing presidents. Not all of them lettered, but all of them were on rosters at one point or another. So that was one of those topics that we kind of brought up earlier this week. Again, if you'd like to join this conversation about anything college football, just hit request. Would love to let you up. We'll hear from you. Some other interesting news this week. One of the ongoing sagas, and maybe some of you want to talk about this, is watching what's going on with the Pac-12 media rights situation. There were a couple of articles earlier in the week, actually, I should say last week. Sports Business Journal, those guys do a lot of great work. We've had a couple of them as guests, both as AMAs as well as Twitter Space guests. They had an interesting podcast where they were talking about the state of Pac-12 media rights. And they ended their segment with things are not looking good for the Pac-12 network from a linear perspective. When we're talking linear, again, with media rights, we're talking about being on, what we call legacy television, being on cable. And basically, they were saying the Big 12 renewing their deal with ESPN and Fox kind of took the last big deal off the market in that Fox really isn't interested in getting involved with the Pac-12 media rights unless they get a deal for pennies on the dollar. Amazon is theoretically out there, but they're very picky. They only want the top game each week and not the Pac-12 network games on Prime or anything like that. And to their credit, they said late last week, Sports Business Journal identified that Apple TV was rumored as a third party interested in the deal. But we'll get to that in a moment. They're considered a little bit weaker because they're a streamer, not a linear network like an ESPN or Fox Sports or CBS Sports Network. All of those have a bit more cachet as linear networks available on cable providers. None of the other big sports names are interested in the Pac-12 media network, according to Sports Business Journal. That includes TNT, CBS, NBC. Meanwhile, at Disney, Bob Iger reiterated on an earnings call that ESPN is going to have to cut back and on what it pays for in rights and pick up on things that they feel are more selective. So kind of building on this kind of Pac-12 network story or I should say Pac-12 media deal story, Brett McMurphy followed up also about 6 days ago that CBS and Turner are no longer involved in the Pac-12's media rights negotiations, again, reinforcing what was said by Sports Business Journal. However, today, one of the interesting stories, again, it's out of the Post, New York Post, Apple emerges as a potential landing spot for Pac-12 football. So this is a curious situation. We're seeing one of the P5 struggling to find a network deal, which is fascinating because these aren't small markets. Even though, they've lost USC and UCLA, the marquee programs in terms of being in the LA market. And we'll talk a little bit more. And of course, if you'd like to join the conversation, hit request. But we'll talk a little bit more about the Pac-12's look at expansion right now. But they still possess the Bay Area. They still possess, Seattle, Portland. They still have some access to Southern California and interest. So it's not a tiny footprint, especially, you've got Denver, Salt Lake City, not quite the same cachet as some of those now Big Ten network areas with Chicago, LA, and the New York metropolitan area. But it's interesting to watch the Pac-12 network struggle in this time to try and find a replacement. Certainly, Apple would be an interesting choice. Apple TV is fairly popular as an online streaming, but I'm not sure if they're going to have the right audience for the Pac-12. We'll have to see. But this is one of those ongoing stories, and it's fascinating to watch the reactions on our CFB as well as Twitter to these kinds of stories. A Washington fan, Incarnate Zebra. Actually, I love his reaction was just fade me. This is not a good story, and I have to say, in reaction, some people have asked if PBS might be interested in a Pac-12 media rights deal. Masterpiece Theater producing Pac-12 content could be an instant watch, and credit to 1969 on that one. That's probably one of my favorite ideas of what potential there could be. And FSU Knoll 77, potential game-winning 2-minute drive narrated by David Attenborough would be really exciting. So, maybe that they should try it, like something like that. And, the real sad point for all of this are the two programs that seem to be stuck, no matter where the Pac-12 ends up. Oregon State and Washington State. Sturge 22 put it best as an Oregon State fan. I hate it here because they are struggling to figure out where they're going to land. And right now, who knows? Maybe it might be Apple TV at this rate. Speaking of the Pac-12, a couple of different stories. Again, they've been kind of heavy on that this week on our CFB as well as in kind of college football news. And again, if you'd like to talk about any topic in college football, feel free to hit request. Would love to hear from you on Tuesday nights. We just sort of hear from you and or talk about the topics of the day. My name is Bobak Hayeri. This is our CFB Talk 127. But heading back into the Pac-12, the other hot topic is, of course, how they're going to expand or if they're going to expand. But it seems almost certain in this past week and a half that we've started to hear that the Pac-12 university and the Pac-12 universities and through Mountain West Wire, it appears they approve the next steps in trying to approach San Diego State and Southern Methodist as part of the expansion process to kind of rebuild the conference and its footprint in major markets. San Diego State, after USC and UCLA, is probably easily the strongest program in terms of market reach in Southern California. San Diego itself, fairly large city. It's got a metro of about 4 or 5 million. It's obviously not the LA area, which is a metro of close to, well, depending on how you cut it, 17 million or more. But it does reach up north. Actually, still, it's humorous to remember that San Diego State played 2 seasons in the southern reaches of Los Angeles in Carson when they were building Snapdragon Stadium after they demolished Qualcomm. So they actually had played as a home stadium in the LA area. Does it have the same reach as the 2 Pac-12 schools? No. Pardon me, as the 2 LA schools? No. But does it add to the Pac-12 reach and bring it back into Southern California? Yes. And why is that important? Certainly, the recruiting in Southern California has always been strong. Some people have said it's perhaps eroded a little bit, especially compared to the ascendancy of some of these hotbeds in the South, which have always been strong, but have really only deepened, and Texas, of course. But it would add to that. And SMU joining the Pac-12 seems like a reasonable idea because bringing in the Metroplex, obviously there was a long time where TCU and SMU were more equal in that metro in terms of where they were. And but adding SMU will give suddenly the Pac-12 a beachhead in Big 12 country. We have someone who wants to join the conversation about whatever you'd like. So Harry James Taylor, just feel free to unmute. Would love to hear from you.
Thanks, guys. First of all, great. I enjoy doing this every week, first of all. Secondly, and I know that this isn't really part of what y'all are talking about right now, but what if they were to join the rest of the Big 12 and something were to happen? I think that would totally benefit both teams. It would give Utah somebody to kind of play with on the what would that be, the East Coast, and because I can see them adding San Diego State and Southern Methodist, but that really wouldn't add anything like power wise. You know what I'm saying? Contender wise, I would think.
And it's interesting too because you always wonder: is it a chicken or egg thing with when you're bringing someone up from, one of the G5 conferences? Because TCU, when they came up, they had a few seasons where they were really good, and in fact, maybe they're not even the best comparison. Because I'm thinking of Utah, I'm thinking of TCU. Both of them Utah had been the original BCS buster when that was the thing. When they had that 2005 season and went to the Fiesta Bowl. But at the same, so they had proven themselves a bit before they joined the Pac-12, and TCU as well was a strong Mountain West program. SMU has been kind of a contender. They've always kind of been in the background. Now, how much of that was the head coach who just took TCU to the national championship is a whole other question. But I agree with you. But at the same time, hopefully they will see the idea is they'll see that increase in funds. Of course, the Pac-12 and Big 12 are not going to be able, and to a lesser extent, the ACC are not going to be able to compete at the level the Big 10 and SEC are at right now. But they could, hopefully level up facilities and what they can do there. But I agree with what you're saying. But the trick is, who else do you add? My favorite, by the way, the other side note is, and they had to go ahead and put out Dennis Dobb at CBS had to confirm that Rice is not in the mix for the Pac-12 as of now. And while they're in Houston, that one would have been speaking of teams that wouldn't necessarily be powered up, that would have been a tall order for the Rice Owls to join the Pac-12 and expect them to be able to even compete at that level. I think San Diego State and SMU have had glimpses of that, and San Diego State has certainly invested in their program. That Snapdragon Stadium, by all accounts, other than, unfortunately, it had the worst debut of any stadium at probably in quite a few years, not necessarily of all time. But by all accounts, people who've been to games since that disastrous opener, either as fans or in the press box, have said it's a wonderful facility. So they've got something going there. But it's interesting. Now, Harry, who would you consider adding to the Pac-12 if you were trying to broaden its reach?
Well, to be honest, I don't really think you can add that much over there, because I think a lot of the power is already taken. Or our old buddy Lincoln, who did so good at Oklahoma, now going to now at USC and all that. He's now going to be hitting the road again to with UCLA, obviously. but to kind of replace those teams, there's not really a team out there really, and that's really the whole problem that I'm trying to wrap my head around here.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
unless you
It's
want to, unless you want to do it like what you're saying and kind of bring somebody up like from a lower division like a Boise State or something like that. But again,
Oh, I agree with you. And I think when they're trying to figure that out, instead of kind of focusing too much on the football program, because Boise State certainly has a lot of success in its history. I think really what they're looking at is trying to restore some of the TV money as well, because Boise State's always its biggest problem is it's in a really, I mean, it's just not a hugely populated area. Its TV market isn't very big. While San Diego State, and it's so funny too, it's the same benefit of Rutgers. Like it's Rutgers really pulling the New York market with them. I'm not sure we can credibly say it's a big significant number that Rutgers does bring, but it does give access to that market. So it's kind of like the Rutgers argument. You're bringing, a school in San Diego that kind of has access also to LA as kind of it's certainly close enough that it has some reach over there, but at least you're bringing a major metropolitan area, but especially SMU, right in the heart of Dallas, you're bringing in another major metropolitan area that you could theoretically get a footprint for the rest. So I think that's how they're looking at it. It's like Boise State's neat and everything, but the San Diego State and Southern Methodist markets are just so much potentially larger. I think that's why anyone even tossed out the rumor that, however true it was or not, that Rice would be on plate. But Rice, just as a program, doesn't really bring enough, I think, for them to be credible. As just as a program, I think they would require way too much of a radical overhaul of where they're at. While SDSU and SMU kind of at least have put together enough of the starting point where you could add on to it, and presumably, I mean, both programs obviously are probably really strongly interested in that. I think it was, oh goodness, where was that? Yeah, Jason Shear at a swim and dive championship banquet in Houston yesterday. This is from several days ago. The San Diego State athletic director told people that the Aztecs are going to be joining the Pac-12 and it will be announced soon. So, for the most part, it seems all arrows say that they're going to join the Pac-12. And my mind, it's got to be all about that TV footprint at this point, and the fact that those programs at least have some facilities built out. I mean, the only other one that might be interesting, but I think again they're kind of they're not quite where Rice is in the sense that they haven't really focused quite at the level of football, but they've had such a history of being unsuccessful. Would be UNLV only because Las Vegas could be interesting. Las Vegas is always an oddball market. Like until we really saw the pro teams start to finally move there, it was always considered territory in the way they would kind of cut it up of LA, as odd as that is to seem. Famously, the Dodgers would, and even the Raiders would get really angry if anyone threatened to move a team, or not threatened, but thought of moving a team there because they said, we will sue you. This is our market. The way they kind of divide up the country in some of the pro leagues. But when the NHL moved there, that kind of opened the door. Obviously, the Raiders are there now too. So UNLV is in a decent market. They now have access to an amazing stadium, but I think they're still just a little too. They just haven't had a whole lot of success. So I think that makes them a little less attractive. But they're about the only other team out west that seems to have a potential there. But I don't see
sure.
them. Yeah.
I think it was real interesting, and all this came out just a year ago. I think it was really big that 2 or 3 years ago. That's when we, as far as Oklahoma, announced that us in Texas, or actually it was A&M that kind of did what they did, kind of squeamishly, but they kind of released it. They did what they did, and then the Big 12, the rest of the Big 12 kind of got together and says, this is what we're going to do about it, because what they ended up doing is they ended up getting BYU. I think that would be I think that would be a great addition for the Pac-12 if they would have known this whole
Oh
thing was going to
yes.
happen. But now they're going to be in the Big 12
Oh, the
because that would give
BYU.
Utah. Yeah,
BYU long coveted joining the Pac-12, and that would have been perfect for Utah because the Holy War would have absolutely been an annual thing. The kind of forced Colorado Utah rivalry was neat, but it was never really that passionate. The two teams kind of liked each other. It was. I remember the first time they were going to play. One of the coaches. And I don't know if he just made it up or what, but he brought a broken bicycle and said somebody from the other team broke his kid's bicycle, and they were trying to create some drama. It was utterly comical. And then those two fans bases just kind of got along. They were like, hey, we're the two oddball mountain teams in the Pac-12. But yeah, no, BYU they would have loved to have been a part of the Pac-12. But hey, you know what? Sometimes when you don't, the girl who wants to join, if you don't put a ring on it, yeah, that was so now suddenly Cal isn't acting, wouldn't have started because the historical thing was I believe Cal was the program that was the least amenable to having BYU. That's the rumor. That was like if you went back 20 years ago, that would always be how they'd kind of say it. It's like, oh, Cal, they don't want to deal with it. It's a clash of they would have been the only religious school, blah, blah, blah. They don't play on Sundays, blah, 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 all that stuff that was kind of thrown out there. But ultimately, they have a national following. They're a decent enough program and they care about football. Hey, Big 12 made the right move and they were the ones willing to pull that trigger. And now the Pac 12 is, again, totally desperate there. We have someone else up here. And again, whatever the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Thak, it's good to see you again.
Yo, what's up, fellas?
Hey.
Hey, man. I just want to talk about these rule changes. Y'all see that? What are your thoughts on the potential rule changes to slim down the game a little bit? I'm on the fence. You never really lived until you've watched 4 hours of a Texas football game. I forget what it was this most recent year. It was Texas versus somebody, a rock fight. It was 4 hours long, and there was like no other interesting games on. What do you think about shortening down these some snaps, shortening down the plays, man? Get rid of the damn TV timeouts if they want.
Yeah, no, I
want to
hear
do
you.
that.
I mean, that's the number one thing I think everyone would rather just cut down on, media timeout. That sort of slows things to a halt. You see, especially if you're live at a game and you see that one guy walk on the field, like roughly was like the 30-yard line, and that's because it's a TV timeout. He's there so the refs can see him, and he gives the hand signals like to kind of signal when the game can actually start again. The person who's really in charge of the game, the one who could actually stop it, is that one guy from the network who walks on the field and tells him to stop. The problem is ultimately they're the ones that pay all the big bucks that let all this happen. So unfortunately that isn't it. And I hear you. I'm not a huge fan of cutting down the games that much. I'm not worried that it'll necessarily ruin it because I think that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, if everyone's on the same playing field, it shouldn't cause too much chaos. Of course, what'll always happen is that first year, someone will figure out a way, if there is a way, to game the rules in such a way that'll cause them to adjust it the following season. I still remember, was Brett Bielema when he was at Wisconsin who figured out the way that when they changed the rules one year, the way they would start the clock, he figured out if he kept taking penalties, he could run out a clock for an extended period of time against Penn State. And that was back when Joe Pa was at Penn State, and he was just furious. But my background's a lawyer. If you know how to lawyer the rules, I mean, hey, respect for me on that one. But so who knows? Maybe we'll see something like that. Someone will figure out how to trick the game to do that. Hey, Harry, you were about to say something there. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's all good. I just think that it's really funny that these kind of rules are about to very well take place in the next 2 or 3 years, and how we're about to go join the SEC in 2 or 3 years. That's just kind of, and Nick Saban's in on this too. Nick Saban's the one that doesn't like the no go huddle. You step out of bounds and the time stops the clock. He's the one that didn't like it in the first place. And I just think it's kind of funny that he's the one that didn't like it in the first place. And here comes Oklahoma and Texas, two of the better teams that do it, and they're about to join the SEC.
Hey, so we got an Oklahoma fan in here joining the SEC. Hey, man, where's the peace pipe? Y'all lost it now. Bring back the peace pipe down, baby. But man, I was watching the XFL, right? See, from St. Louis here, we're not real fond of the NFL anymore. We got the XFL. Man, I didn't even notice at first until somebody pointed out it was a much more enjoyable football game to watch, and I'll tell you why. And it wasn't necessarily because the clock was sped up, and they've done all that. They've engineered it to come out to about 2 hours, and you walk away from that just realizing that they didn't do an ad after the damn kickoff. They didn't do a 2-minute ad after the kickoff, every kickoff, which was fascinating. I didn't realize until somebody pointed out. But there was a lot less television ads and the clock was a little bit faster, and it was definitely a more enjoyable watch. But when I think about it, man, I love those 4 hour slugfest that you're watching and you're like, holy, this game is never going to end. My Saturday is extended basically. It feels like.
I think you've hit the kind of the two sides of the coin because both are enjoyable. The XFL, I think, yeah, it was like their opener was like 2 hours and 45 minutes. But at the same time, if you're really I think most hardcore college football fans, and I think a lot of the people that are sticking around in the offseason to listen to a Twitter space about college football kind of fit into that. So you're all honorary members if you weren't already. But they're the folks that would do enjoy. Like I enjoy. I don't mind if it's a long game, if it's a good game. Granted, as long as we're not talking about too many timeouts or too many media timeouts. But sometimes games are in CBS and ads must be heard. But I would like to see some of these rule changes make sense. The idea of reducing, I think, was the number of consecutive timeouts. That one, I think, would be popular. I think one of the things, and I read some good analysis. There's a good article on The Athletic by Andy Staples where he kind of reviews the rules. And I agree with a lot of what he had to say. But one of the things he pointed out is the XFL has also shown that you can make replay a lot faster. And that's one of those, I think, time sinks in the college football world where, some like a review of a review. I still remember the first time I ever saw that live in person was many years ago. But I was at, the Coliseum, and then there was a review of a review, and I timed it. There was no football for like almost 30 minutes. That was it was a long time ago. I think Bilotti was still at Oregon. But so I think if we can reduce that would be a huge part of it. Maybe having a more dynamic. The other suggestion Andy had, which I thought was great, is also you can cut down on the time to kind of give plays if they finally get around to allowing mics in the helmets like the NFL, especially to call plays. And then he actually points out you wouldn't have the ridiculous sheets on the sideline to block play calling from people seeing it. But at the same time, it would speed it up. You'd be able to get plays on the field quicker. The game would theoretically move a whole lot faster. I think the reason I didn't even know about this. I feel dumb for not knowing this. One of the problems with bringing in helmet radios was it may negate the warranty or something about some of the helmets. But as Andy points out, with all the sheer number of helmets college football programs purchase across all of FBS, FCS would certainly go along with it as well. They can easily just say, no, this needs to be part of it. And there will be a helmet manufacturer that says, yes, sir. How you just tell us, and we'll happily sell all the thousands of helmets that would be required to equip the FBS programs that would need it. So I think those are some of the better ones. And I will that again, those were Andy's Staples' suggestions, but I think it's interesting. I think I would like to see it. I wouldn't mind. I don't know if I think you hit it on again. Thak, you hit the nail on the head. The XFL has been managing to put games under 3 hours, closer to 2.5 hours that have been enjoyable. So you can make it work. You can make it quick. I don't know if we all want to see college football quite that short, especially if you're going to a game, and especially if it's a game that's like you go to the city, you go through your tailgating, the tradition, all the stuff, fun stuff. Some of us have got kind of conditioned to enjoy kind of a long, at least a 3 to 4 hour experience. Maybe not 4 hours, but 3.5 hours. But again, the other argument I've heard is at least it means hopefully your game won't end up on ESPN News, which I'm convinced ESPN News still exists as the overflow channel, because I could come up with lots of other things to put on it. I mean, if we really wanted to have fun, in spring, I think in like May, over in Japan, they're going to have their spring football league. Why not put that on ESPN News at 11 p.m. Eastern? What else are they going to show on there, for crying out loud? Just use the Japanese announcers. Don't even translate it. People will get a kick out of it. Those guys are entertaining. I don't speak Japanese. Watching them call Japanese football, it's like listening to soccer in Mexican Spanish. It's like you're just like, oh my God, this is the way you hear the sport. There, whoever knew Japanese is exciting to listen to college football. That's the things you learn when you get to be kind of in the sicko range, as some of us here. But yeah, no, that's an interesting one. This is an off-season kind of doldrums edition of our CFB Talk. When we get to this point, we've been trying to cut these down, at least for a couple of weeks, down to 30 minutes to try and experiment. So it has been 30 minutes. So I'm going to start wrapping it up here. I just wanted to thank Harry and Thack for being up here. There, it was great to have some ideas when we're talking about Pac-12 expansion and trying to cut down on the time of the game. But we do these every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, and we'll try to bring in guests again. I keep saying that, and it keeps just being busy because it's the opposite. It's so funny. Right after the national championship, I swear everyone's like, you know what, this is my chance to kind of catch up with life. So, and my coworkers are doing, my usual co-hosts are doing the same right now. But on behalf of myself, Bob Ekhairi, on behalf of all of us at RCFB and Reddit CFB, thanks so much for joining us this Tuesday night. This turns into recording as soon as we're done. And now I'm going to hang up and listen